Hey, everybody. Heidi Harris here. Welcome back. Glad you're here. If you don't know me, I am 26-year radio broadcaster, still doing it part-time now, which is kind of better. It gives you more balance in your life and doing the video stuff and podcasting. In addition, so you can follow me, all the socials, Heidi Harris Show, Heidi Harris Show, Heidi Harris Show. I am based in Las Vegas. Many times I talk about Vegas issues. Sometimes I talk about national issues. My last podcast, I interviewed an Air Force general about what happened in Iraq. So please check that out if you're seeing this for the first time. So I do all kinds of things, national, local, whatever it might be. The homeless problem is out of control. Everybody knows that. Dave Marlon is the chief executive officer of Vegas Stronger. He's a nonprofit here in Vegas. He's former CEO and founder of Solutions Recovery. I'll put his entire bio up. Everybody in Vegas knows who Dave Marlon is, but he had an interesting op-ed the other day in the RJ, our local newspaper, talking about the homeless problem and what he'd like to see to change things. And, you know, some of the solutions other people don't want to talk about, he addressed. So I asked him to join me today to kind of clarify and, listen, we're looking for answers. Dave, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Heidi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So now you talked about the whole, I'll link to this column here. I'm not going to read the column to anybody, but it was a great column. And you talked about some of the things that aren't happening. You talked about banning panhandling within 15 feet of ATMs, businesses, and intersections. Let's start with that, because that is a huge deal, whether it's a business or people are hanging out in front of the quick stop or walking in traffic, things like that. Talk about just that. We'll start with that as something you think ought to be banned to help.
Well, I have a lot to say about this. So you might have to cut me off, but
No,
Heidi,
I'm not going to.
In Las Vegas, we have about 8,000 people who are reported to be unhoused. Now, in Los Angeles, we have about 110, maybe 120,000 people who are unhoused. Now, if Vegas is welcoming to homelessness, if we're condoning it and supporting it, and people in Los Angeles realize that if they hitchhike to Las Vegas, which happens to be more of a cash economy than Los Angeles is, so we have the people driving have more money. And if being Sin City, people are more guilty here and more apt to give. If the word on the street becomes that you could make more money working on a corner in Las Vegas than you can on Wilshire in Los Angeles, then many of the unhoused there will hitchhike here.
That's huge. I want to stop you there because that's a big deal, because that is an attraction. I did not realize, I know somebody who used to work at the homeless detail for Metro. I didn't know that they used to bus these people around. They'd give them free bus passes from the Strip and bus them around. So that's one way that these people got into neighborhoods they normally would have had no access to. It's stunning. So your point is they'll find a way to get up here from LA if we're proving to be a better place, is what you're talking about.
Correct. And to me, treating 8,000 people and helping solving this, that's a dual proposition.
Absolutely.
If 100,000 come here, we are swamped and it would be catastrophic for Las Vegas. So to me, from a policy standpoint, it's imperative that we keep it less advantageous to be unhoused in Las Vegas than in our surrounding communities. Because as we've seen in Seattle, many of the people in Seattle are transient, and they went to Seattle because they found they could get food, they could get housing, they could use drugs with impunity. Right. So I love Las Vegas, and to me, it is critical that we keep Las Vegas a place for tourism, a place where we welcome you to spend your discretionary dollars, not a place that you're going to get harassed, you're going to be panhandled, you're going to have to deal with vagrancy, you're going to be shaken down.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I can't even stand the thought of that happening to our town. We've already seen that in the overhead walkways and things like that. It looks like they've regained some control of those, but that got to be a mess. That nonsense would never have happened when the mob was in town, but that's another story. Let's go back to the panhandling within 15 feet of ATM when the mob handled it quietly in the desert. Okay, just kidding. All right. So you talk about the fact that these restrictions about ATMs and business entrances and, once again, intersections, very critical, are already in place. And I did not know that, in places in cities such as Denver and Atlanta. And you said that when they withstood court challenges on that. That's interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. I don't mind a person asking me for money. I didn't mind going to the Smith's shopping center on Rancho in Charleston, but my wife, she's about 110 pounds. And when she would go and take her purse and put it in her cart and go into the shopping center and have large men come up to her and ask her for money, it's a totally different vibe.
That's right.
While me, I'm bothered by it, maybe. For her, she has just safety fears. When I see our senior citizens coming to, or perhaps going to an ATM, drawing some money for their Social Security, and then have a person come and ask them right away. I mean, that is going to raise their blood pressure. They're going to be in a fear situation, and no one living in a place in the United States should be subject to that level of fear and potential predatory behavior.
No, that's a great point. I went into a Stop and Rob yesterday, and there was a guy and there was homeless. I didn't know he was homeless, just standing there talking to her. But then once I looked at him a little closer, it looked like he probably was. She has been allowing him to come in and get a drink and get a cup at her expense. She pays for it as the cashier. Okay. Being nice to the guy. Well, then yesterday she caught him trying to steal something. And this is what's frustrating. You try to extend your hand, and this isn't everybody. I understand that. You try to extend your hand to somebody. You try to be compassionate, and what does he do? Try to screw you over. I will go back to that in a minute. But what's interesting to me is that my whole thing with homeless people is they're human beings deserving of compassion and care, but they shouldn't have more rights than I do. You also talk about places where you can't sit down or lie down in Fremont Street, transit stations, school zones, places like that. Why do you get to pitch a tent at the park? I don't get to spend my weekend with my kids at the park. Why do you have more rights than I do? And this gets very frustrating to me.
Well, to me, I love all of our rights in America, and I love the fact that we're free. However, if somebody is camping in a local park, because they're unhoused, what I have found is more than 9 times out of 10, it's because they have a mental illness or because they have a substance use disorder. That's right. And they might tell you they want to be left alone, they want to be there, but I question their agency. I question whether it's really true. I know, and this was in the article, that over 520 people died from heat last summer in Las Vegas. And to me, that should not be happening in a first world city like Las Vegas. So if somebody tells me they want to be sleeping on the sidewalk, I think their agency is in question. I also think that if you or some of your listeners want to bring their families to a park, I think they have a right to be able to have their children play on the swing sets and not be in fear. And then lastly, I recognize that Las Vegas is a brand, and that our brand is, it used to be known as glitz, glamour, a place to come and spend your disposable income. It's becoming synonymous with the smell of marijuana, with panhandling, with vagrancy, and that is certainly harming our brand, which is very costly. So I think getting help for the people who are unhoused is much more important than me and you having a debate whether they have the right to sleep on the sidewalk in front of my business.
Right. Well, I want these people to get help if they, so desire. But a lot of times the frustrating thing is that people I've talked to who've worked with the homeless, not just this friend of mine who is a cop, but other people I've talked to who've actually worked with the homeless will say that most of them don't want help. That's where my friends are. My friends are living under the bridge there. And you and I can't understand why you'd want to live outdoors and be dirty and be hot and be cold. I don't get it. But many people are telling me they don't want to go where they can't bring their dogs, their drugs, these kinds of things, because that's a whole society that they have in a lot of cases that, of course, I can't understand because I don't live there. And so I want to have compassion, but at the same time, I want it to be effective. And when people really don't want help, what do we do as taxpayers? Because it feels like there's so much money being thrown at this problem, it's exponentially more than the amount of people we hear around houses, 8,000, and we're not seeing a lot of results. So what do we do?
Well, I have something called a golden ticket that I ask people, instead of giving $1 or $5 to somebody who's in the streets, instead give them a golden ticket which is a ticket for free food and shelter. And then because I used to run an insurance company, in the small print, it says clients must engage in counseling and treatment.
Okay.
And we've distributed about 40,000 of these tickets. If you or any of your listeners would like them, we could get them golden tickets. And it's a tool for you. So instead of feeling compelled to be a good Christian and give money, or to be working in a Stop and Shop and give a soda, instead we encourage them to give them a ticket, because if you're unhoused, you're probably fundamentally uncomfortable and looking for a sign. And when somebody gives you a golden ticket, most of the people who receive it recognize this is a sign for them to be able to change their life. And nobody should be living outside in Las Vegas in the summer.
Right. You know, when I see homeless people, the first thought that I have many times is not, I don't look down on them in any way. I look at them and I think this is probably a child who had a really lousy upbringing, right? Maybe a bad situation at home, abuse, neglect, whatever. And that's where it started. And by the time they were teenagers, they were on the street. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And in many, that's how I see it. And I could be wrong. Maybe that's not everybody. But there's a guy who does a whole video series, and it's called Soft White Underbelly. I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I have seen it.
Yeah, love this guy. Leda, what's his first name? Mark Leda. And you've watched the videos. I've watched the videos, and he interviews people in very interesting, hookers and mobsters and people on the street and inbred people and all. He does an amazing job, and he does it with sensitivity. Talks to these people, right? He's not judging them. No one's judging them.
He does a fantastic job.
He does, but he's done something like 8,000 videos. I'll put the link, guys, in the description. He's done like 8,000 videos, and he talks about, there was one video, and I wish I could find it because I'd love to I'll just put the link so you guys can look for it. But he talked one time about, he says, people email me and they say, why don't you give these people money? And he'd say, well, first of all, I think he gives them a stipend for going on the show. Okay, whatever that money is. But he said, if I gave them money, they'd be back here on Monday because they don't have the capacity to use the money correctly like other people would use, whether it's a mental illness, whether it's a drug addiction, whether it's just they've not made those correct life choices. Talk a little bit about that. I thought that was interesting and insightful from a guy who's met far more homeless people than I have.
I'm going to tell you, I've met more homeless people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have spent some of my youth as homeless. Mm-hmm. I've also been addicted to a substance for many years. So I know what having my soul owned is like. Fortunately, I have recovered, and I've learned that integrated behavioral health care treatment is the path out for most people who are unhoused. That's why at Vegas Stronger, we offer immediate access to integrated behavioral health care for our most underserved.
I think that's important. And I want to just give you one quick story, just so you don't know that think I'm some kind of heartless, horrible person. I used to live in a house kind of near Charleston and Rancho, big house. And there was a lady, the house next door was empty. And there was a lady who lived kind of on the porch back there, kept things neat as a pin. And she'd walk around with her suitcase, dressed neatly. She drew these amazing pencil drawings of politicians and things like that. She was so talented. We tried to give her food. Oh, no, I'm on a restricted diet. Okay. And I looked out the window one time and there was a guy yelling at her, threatening to hurt her. I'm cleaning that up on the porch. So we called the police. And while the cops he took off. While the cops were coming, I asked her, I said, are you okay? And she said, I'm okay. I said, do you know him? She goes, I don't know. You meet all kinds. I've since seen her many times for years walking up and down that area, Charleston, Rancho. I'm sure you'd know her if you saw her. And when the cops came, they said, do you want us to roust her? And we said, absolutely not. She's okay back here on the porch. She's not hurting anybody. We'll look out for her. So I don't want anybody. I mean, you know me a little bit, but people who don't know me, I want you to understand when we had that opportunity to say, yeah, get rid of her. She's homeless. We said, no, let her stay here when she comes at night, whatever. She's not hurting anybody clearly. And I saw her once at that Smith's that you mentioned, that very famous Smith's on Rancho in Charleston. And she had some kind of a food or some kind of a voucher or a card or something. So clearly she's getting some kind of help from somewhere. And clearly she's not all there. She's kind of childlike in her demeanor, but she wasn't hurting anybody. She was, she was very neat and she walked up. It broke my heart to see her. And so everybody wants to just take these people and take them in and fix them. I think that's the kind of heart you should have for people.
And that's why at Vegas Stronger, we offer integrated behavioral health care for the people who need it the most.
So talk to me a little bit about what integrative does, that the integrative approach. I mean, are you providing housing right away? Are they staying at the shelter downtown? How is that working?
That's the $1 million question. And when every client walks in, and we have 100 new clients a week coming to the Vegas Stronger building, and they usually walk in saying they want a job and they want housing. And we start our process with, are you willing to get a biopsych and social assessment, a clinical assessment, so we find out really what's going on. Mm-hmm. When they finish meeting with a master's prepared, licensed counselor, we then have them come see our psychiatrist. And we have 4 psychiatric prescribers who, whether it's schizophrenia, bipolar, depression medicine, or medication-assisted treatment to help them with a substance use disorder, we have them receive integrated counseling and medical care to help address their root problems. We also have a robust case management team, and we will find a bed for every client who walks in. Now, every client's different, and some people have a managed care organization that will fund them in a transitional housing bed. Some have a HUD VASH or Social Security payment. Others have absolutely nothing. And what we'll do is we'll get them a bed in one of the shelters. If they go to the shelter and then we pick them up with our buses in the morning and bring them back to therapy, if they complete a week or 2 of therapy, we'll then move them from a shelter to a sober living bed. While they're in the sober living bed for the next 2, 3, 6, 12 months, we're helping them rebuild their life skills, address their core issues, and then move to permanent housing. So we believe in having people go through a transition from congregate housing to supervised housing to independent living while we address their underlying mental behavioral issues.
And speaking of transition, that's a great transition. The Campus for Hope is being proposed for Charleston and Jones. And it's a $200 million project. As you well know, you know a lot about it. For people who don't know, it's a homeless shelter. They keep trying to tell the people who live around there who are beside themselves with anger about this, that it's transitional housing. You've gone to San Antonio. You've seen the shelter. They say it's not based on that. I'm not buying it. Tell me what you know about the Campus for Hope.
Well, an important distinction between the one in San Antonio and the one they're proposing building on Charleston and Jones is the one in San Antonio has a shelter, a low barrier shelter as part of it. And at the Campus of Hope in Las Vegas, they are not going to have a low barrier shelter.
Okay, tell people what a low barrier shelter is for those who don't know.
There's a place called the Courtyard, the City of Las Vegas Courtyard on Four-Master and Las Vegas Boulevard. That is a low barrier shelter where 600 to 800 people who are unhoused lay out on mats each night. And it's a terrible place, but that is a first entry for somebody who loses their clothes on Fremont Street and has nothing. The police or any do-gooder could take people to this low barrier shelter. They could be partially inebriated. They could have a variety of things going on, but there's no barrier to it. Anybody could come in. Now, this will be a navigation center, of which I expect 4 to 8 navigation centers to be around the valley. At these navigation centers, they will stabilize people and get them to be appropriate to go to the Campus for Hope transitional living. So it won't be low barrier folks. It'll be people who are 1 or 2 steps up from there. So that's a positive for the neighbors in that Charleston area. Now, I will tell you that that's 900 beds, and the 200 million number you threw out, that's the build cost. It's going to cost 30 million a year to operate it.
That's right.
So that's 30 million every year in addition, right, with inflators. So it's pretty costly on a per bed I'm a math person. So looking at the cost per bed, it's pretty costly, but I recognize that the state and the resort corridor, they wanted to have an answer. And the fact that they're willing to put their money in to help with this problem, I applaud and appreciate them willing to spend, for-profit dollars to help address this problem. And having 900 additional beds will reduce some of the pressure in our valley. Now, I started by saying there's 8,000 unhoused. They're looking to have 900 beds where people stay for potentially a couple of years. So this will address maybe 10% of our housing crisis, but of our homelessness crisis, but it will be helpful. Now, I'm not going to pontificate on where it goes because in the rehab business, we have something called NIMBY. Everybody wants rehabs, but nobody wants it in their backyard. And wherever they put it, there would be people complaining about it. So I recognize it, but I would ask them to recognize that these are people who have gone through a navigation center and they're cleared for independent living. So they should be, trying to rebuild their life with supportive services to position as many as possible to be successful. So I am grateful that there is some additional resources available to help this problem, because I don't think Las Vegas should be known as the city which, is filled with the unhoused.
Absolutely not. Okay, let me ask you a couple of questions about that. We won't argue about the location, because I know people I've been to a couple of the meetings and the neighbors are just up in arms. And I also went to the one down on Flamingo where they were going to clean out the washes, so I'm trying to pay attention to this stuff, and people are having all kinds of problems down there, as you know, also with the homeless situation. The people in Charleston and Jones area are freaked out about the possibility that they have not been clear about who they're going to take. And Kim Jeffries, who runs this new CEO, who ran San Antonio shelter, which has an F crime rating in the neighborhood, F crime rating. Okay. They're very upset about that. They're very worried about it. She doesn't have a good track record of running that, not hurting the neighborhood. They're concerned. And most of the people I've talked to, they're happy to help homeless people. They don't have a problem with that, but they're concerned how many people are going to be there. We don't know. 900 beds. Will they be full? We don't know who's going to be there. They haven't been specific. They talk a good game. They talk about these transition centers, but they have not been able to give anybody specifics. They talked about women and children. Then they talked about kids aging out of foster care. We don't know who it's going to be. No, they're not telling anybody at these meetings, because I've been to a couple of these. But what's frustrating to me is that we don't know how many people are going to be wandering around during the day without jobs, without, nobody wants that transient. You don't want to move a transient population into an established neighborhood. That's not fair. And I'm not asking you to defend or, criticize the location. But those are some of the concerns. Will this campus of hope keep people I don't want to say locked in, but on the campus during the day? Or are they going to be free to hang out at the park? There are 14 schools within a half a mile or whatever of this place. I mean, that's a concern some of the people have.
Yeah, Kim Jeffries has come and sat in my office, and she's a good, conscientious person. I would let her answer.
She won't, Dave. That's the problem. She won't. She's been asked direct questions by people and she won't answer it. I watched her. She shook like a leaf at this one meeting where 200 people were in the room screaming about this. She didn't have a thing to say to anybody. She doesn't know how to answer any questions, and she ought to. She's getting paid what? Close to $400,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yes.
I will tell you that the campus of hope in San Antonio has a low barrier shelter with over 1,000 people sleeping each night, and they're leaving each day. So the fact that there's a negative crime rate nearby, I wouldn't consider that apples to apples with the one that's considered for Las Vegas. The one in Las Vegas, that is transitional housing only. So I would expect it to be materially better. I don't know if it moves it out of the F range in crime, but it will be better than the San Antonio model, just because we're leaving the low barrier shelters at places like the city's courtyard. Yeah. And I believe Henderson and North Las Vegas are also compelled to build a low barrier shelter. So there is a place for people to go.
Are they going to be able to leave the campus? Because it's 900 people in a neighborhood. I mean, where these are established neighborhoods. You don't want 900 people who are not putting them down, saying they're not human beings. They're transient people. How is that a good idea? Getting them off the strip and putting them into an established neighborhood, any established neighborhood, wandering around. They keep saying they're going to have this and programs and schools and all these things there, but we haven't gotten any clarification on that. Nobody has.
Let me play devil's advocate.
Please do.
I ran Solutions Recovery for 13 years, and I had transitional housing rehabs in those very neighborhoods. I had it just north of Jones. I had them in Section 10.
Right.
And these are human beings who are trying to get well, who are addressing serious mental health issues, serious substance use disorders. And I felt more comfortable having my supervised clients there than some of the houses that are in the neighborhoods right now.
No, let me stop you there. That's important because I would think, and I've lived in neighborhood. I lived in a neighborhood a while back where they had one of those like brain rehab places a couple doors down. This doesn't bother me a bit. I don't think most people are bothered by that, or even a rehab house or whatever. Most of the time, there are no problems. No one has a problem with it. But wouldn't that money be better spent on those small rehab houses where you actually have more accountability? There's more personal contact with somebody than a 900-bed behemoth where who knows what's going to happen. I mean, it doesn't make to your point about the amount of money they're paying per bed when it's just going to be a revolving door. It makes no sense. And one other quick thing I want to ask you. When you talk about gaming wanting to, and because gaming has said this, Virginia Valentine has said, we want to relocate the problem from the strip. Okay. If you want to relocate the problem, why are you building a campus for hope? Because it's supposed to be only transitional. So in other words, someone on the strip who's homeless, who's trying to sleep next to a hotel, is not going to go from there to the campus for hope, right? That's not what people are being told.
They would go to a navigation center.
Right. So they're lying about that. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say the campus for hope is going to solve our problem and then, it's not going to be everybody. See what I'm saying? They're not giving the residents are furious. They're not giving them the information that they need, is my point.
Well, I recognize that for decades, the residents have been plagued with clients from Ross and Neal, the state mental hospital that is already on that campus.
Right.
So they're used to people with serious mental illnesses walking into the neighborhoods and potentially causing problems. So I recognize that the alert of the neighbors there is very high. I do believe that they are overestimating how serious of a problem this will be, because I've seen recovery environments where large groups of people get well. And as long as the low barrier shelter isn't there, that people are getting stabilized on some mental health medications, they're getting detox from fentanyl or methamphetamine before they get there. And then in the housing there, they're going to have drug testing. They're going to have supervision. So
okay, but wait a minute. Okay, I'm going to stop you there because Kim Jeffries did not say that. When somebody asked her at the meeting, I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm telling you what she said in the meeting. Somebody asked her in the meeting if they're going to do drug tests. And she wasn't even specific about that. Maybe, are you going to test it for alcohol? The woman had no answers, Dave. I was in the room at the time. No answers. So that's what's frustrating the neighbors more than anything, is that they're going back and forth on what they're going to provide all the time. And they're not saying people have to pass a drug test to be in this facility. And what about the people who have their dogs, who don't want to leave their pets? I love pets. I got a bunch of them myself. But what about them? Are they going to be allowed in here? If not, what happens to their pets? But these questions are not being answered to the satisfaction of people in 5 zip codes.
I believe the Campus for Hope in San Antonio has a great pet boarding area.
Okay, good.
Seems to be safe and they get cared for.
Oh, that's good.
I also believe, and this is my belief, I don't know for sure, but I believe there will be drug testing and alcohol testing at the Campus of Hope once it gets up and running. My sense is that there's a lot of fingers involved in this. There's state legislators, the governor.
No kidding.
There's the
they're keeping a list. Believe me, the residents are keeping a list of all of them.
And I believe that makes Kim Jeffries' job really hard, because, and I bet she's reluctant because she's got to check with a lot of bosses right now before she can move ahead. But like I said, I think it will be better than we're worried about.
Well, I don't know that that's true or not. I understand there was another location that was considered also, I think, like near Boulder and Sahara, I think. There's like an old
Yes.
Kmart down there or something like that that was considered, which makes more sense to me. There's a bus line right there also, and all the things that, anyway, I don't want to argue about that one way or the other, but I think a lot of residents, I know they just filed a lawsuit, a couple of them, and they're frustrated because they're not getting their questions answered. And that's the thing that makes people mad. We don't want to pit residents against homeless people. No one wants to do that. But when you feel like, once again, they're getting more, where's our say? Where's the say of anybody who lives anywhere near there? That's what they're saying. We haven't had any input in this, and they don't feel like that's fair.
Yeah, it's also tricky because it's not like there's one resident representative that some negotiation could take place. We're dealing with a wide amount of constituents who, some of which may be appeased, some, they're hell bent that they're never going to let it. They're going to want to fight it to the end.
Right.
So I hope all of us as a community don't spend a year or multiple years in litigation, that we do the best we can for the community and move forward as quick as possible.
What is that the best way to do it, though? A large facility? I mean, if you were in charge for a day, okay, we're going to make Dr. Dave Marlon the king for the day. What kind of facility would you design that you think would be the most effective for the most people and do the most good for the most people and do the best to alleviate our problems here?
Well, I believe Vegas Stronger, where I work
Let
right now.
Let me take myself out of here.
I believe Vegas Stronger, we're going to treat more people than the Campus for Hope will in a year anyway. And we just have an outpatient facility. I have over 80 clinicians who are providing evidence-based behavioral health care to the unhoused. Now, I will point out that I'm much less than a tenth of the cost, and we're treating more people. So I recognize.
Why don't we do that, though? Why don't they take that money and give it? And I've never been to your facility. I'll have to get down there.
I hope you do come down and come take a tour and come see it. It's really a magic place of healing.
Oh, I'm sure. And I've been down to, the places down there where there's a rehab. It's kind of a rehab hospital where someone checks out of a hospital who's homeless and can't quite go home yet. I have a friend who works there. So I've been to those facilities. I've not been to yours, but I'll have to do that. But the thing is, why don't they take that money and divide it up among the various agencies that are actually doing the job? And here's why I say that. There's a great book. It was written years ago called The Tragedy of American Compassion, written by Marvin Olasky. And he talked about, the history of helping the poor in America and things like that. And it used to be that when people were poor or, I guess you call them homeless, whatever, they would, churches and whatever your faith is, would take these people in, have a personal interest in how they did and get them back on track. But then once government came in with welfare and programs and all these things, your average person went, oh, I don't have to worry about it. The government's taking care of it. So there was no accountability. They used to actually have a phrase they used, I'm sure you've heard, called the worthy poor. And they say, okay, these aren't people who are poor because they've done this and this and this and this. These are people who just have fallen on hard times or whatever, but they would take a personal interest in their success. So going back to those small houses that you mentioned, I don't know any homeowner who would object to having those in their neighborhood. They're like Airbnbs, if they're managed correctly, they work fine. But wouldn't that money be better spent that way, where there would probably be a better outcome than some big building with hundreds of beds where no one can really keep track of what anyone's doing?
I fundamentally believe that the Vegas Stronger model is more efficient, and coupled with housing partners could be more efficient. Although I recognize that having one hub, so I could have the psychiatrists and job placement and a lot of the services like they do at the Campus of Hope in San Antonio, it does have some economies of scale. And we do have a big problem here. So I prefer the Vegas Stronger model, but I do think there is a place for a Campus of Hope someplace in the Vegas Valley, when this larger institutionalized place, to be able to have lots of people get stabilized and return to self-sufficiency.
It's so interesting. Years ago, the person I was working with on the radio, and I went down to one of the homeless shelters downtown, and we were talking with a young couple who had moved to Las Vegas from California. And since they moved to Vegas, things didn't work out. Stop me if you've heard this, right? A lot of people move to Vegas thinking they're going to find their fortune, and it doesn't work out well. Well, you only have to go down, just grab the Greyhound. It's real quick, right? But they didn't leave. They didn't go back to California. So they wound up in a shelter, And over the course of the time in the shelter, somehow she got pregnant and had a baby. I'm not sure how you do that with lack of privacy, but okay. Anyway, so she had this baby. Okay. And I was talking to them and I said, well, and she said, well, I've got family in California. I said, well, why don't you go back there to California? Well, where you have family and support. You know what she said to me? She looked right at me, David. She said, well, no, we want to do it on our own. And I thought, wait a minute, ma'am, you are living in a shelter with whoever the daddy is and your baby. Do it on your own. But that kind of thinking is very difficult to try to understand, because they were taking up beds that could have been, because they had an option. They could have gone home to family and had that family support. And yet they were taking up beds that could have gone to people who don't have that. So I thought that was very odd.
Well, it is challenging. And to me, it comes down to, the American concept of agency, that we are a free country and we're going to let each person decide what they want to do. I have 2 kids, both 23 years old right now. Sometimes they make decisions that I think that is the wrong decision. You shouldn't make that. But
and so did you at that age, and so did I at that age.
Correct.
Thank God Google wasn't around. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but they're emancipated adults,
Yeah.
and we have to let them make those decisions. To me, having access for immediate help for them, that's what we should have in our community. I'm grateful Vegas Stronger's here. I'm also grateful that the state and the casinos are trying to help in a way. I do hope they navigate through this quickly.
One of the points that Tick Segerblum made when I went to the meeting at Flamingo, like I said, I've been to the meetings in both communities. He talked about the fact that you can't make people get in a car. You can't forcibly, I guess, move them somewhere else. I did not know that.
Yeah, we do dozens of interventions, and we call it a compassionate, assertive intervention. I recognize that when someone's using drugs on the street, having a conversation with them is almost a waste of time. So I like directing them, maybe a hand on their back and saying, here, come jump in the bus. We're going to go to Vegas Stronger. We're going to get you some food. We're going to get you some shelter. Would you please come with us now? Now, if they say, no, screw you, get away from me, we have to respect that. But that's why in my article, some of these laws to reduce the access to panhandling, to make it a little harder for them, that's going to enable us to be more effective with our outreach so we can help more people, get them off the street, and not have so many people die in our summer heat this summer.
Hey, little Heidi Harris fun fact. Before I was a talk show host, I did a couple of things, one of which was being a cocktail waitress in the largest casino in the world at that time. I wrote a book called Cocktail Waitress Wisdom, Life Lessons Learned While Carrying a Tray in Las Vegas. It's available on Amazon. By the way, out of 50,000 books on Amazon in the category of professional and business humor, my book is in the top 350. So please pick up a copy. You're missing something. Anybody you know who might be in the service industry, they'll love it. Anybody in, frankly, any industry will love it. So Cocktail Waitress Wisdom, pick it up. And thank you to those who already have read it and have highly rated it and have appreciated it and put me in the top 350.
There are several municipalities in the country that have a 3-strike rule, that if you are unhoused and you refuse help 3 times, you now could be arrested for vagrancy. I would not be opposed to that because, again, I do not think people should be sleeping outside in a Las Vegas summer. It is unsafe, it's unsanitary, and it's inappropriate.
Right. And then just the other day, there was a huge fire you may have seen on Boulder Highway at some motorcycle dealership, I think. And when they had the picture in the RJ of all these motorcycles that were burned, it was an overhead picture. What was behind the motorcycle dealership? A homeless encampment. And the first thing I said to my friend was, I texted my friend a picture. I go, hey, I wonder what caused the fire. And sure as heck, it turns out that's what caused the fire. That's the problem too. You've got people living in third world conditions, sometimes starting fires to stay warm. Sometimes starting fires are causing problems just to be obnoxious. And nobody should be subject to that. And that really is what it becomes, third world conditions. Yeah,
it's not just starting fires. A lot of the copper theft is occurring from these homeless camps. It's also, I'm a clinician and I read the charts for our clients that come in. And when I read about the atrocities that happen, particularly to females that are in these camps, it is horrific. And it really strengthens my belief that we should not allow people to sleep in camps, in empty lots, or in front of businesses, or in the tunnels of Las Vegas. Nothing positive is happening there. And
Right.
even though they might tell you, leave me alone, I want to be free, I recognize that they're generally imprisoned by a substance use disorder or subject to a serious mental illness. And they deserve our compassion and our help, even if we have to be more assertive.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up, because they say, I want to be free, but the truth is they're enslaved by something else.
Correct. Especially with this fentanyl crisis.
Oh yeah, terrible. So going back to the women thing and the Campus for Hope, and once again, I'm not trying to pick on you about it, because I'm asking you because you've dealt with these people more than I have, and maybe they've answered more of your questions than they have to the people who've been in the meetings. The one meeting that she held, the crowd didn't like her too much, so I didn't have any more. But what about the women? I mean, they say they want to have women and children there. I don't want women and children, whether it's illegal immigration. I know Trump got a bunch of crap for the cages. It wasn't cages. It was chain link fencing to prevent the children from being victimized by unrelated adults. And what about a shelter? I mean, that kind of thing's a real possibility. Children getting hurt with, a lot of 900 people in that situation. And I've not heard any details on that. Have you?
Yes. She specifically expressed to me that they would be separated, that, women and children, that the children would be in separate areas. I'm not sure how that was policed, but the fact that we have a person who's been running a transitional living facility for more than a decade, I recognize she brings a tremendous amount of experience, and I'm grateful that our city has a person with her capability to help lead this endeavor. No kid should be unhoused.
Absolutely not.
In our city. The fact that so many of the kids in the Clark County School District have no address or report as homeless, but they're going through school. I found school challenging. I lived in an apartment building. I mean, thank goodness I couldn't imagine how hard it would be for a child to go through school living, not in a stable housing environment. And we should do whatever we can, like support Kim Jeffries and her Campus for Hope, or other things, to be able to have a stable place for our most underserved.
Yeah, I was at the park. This is going to be last summer now, because I remember it was hot. And I went to the park, and there was a young girl at the park sitting there with shorts on and, breast, but shorts on and whatnot, talking about my dogs. And I said, we got to talking with her. She had spent the night at the park, and she didn't look dirty or anything like she'd been on the streets long, but she was 16, spent the night at the park, and family issues. And I spent about an hour talking to her. And I said, honey, you can't be out here. You cannot be out here at night. You God knows what'll happen to you. I said, you can't.
Correct.
So I called my husband. And I said, honey, can you do me a favor? Can you bring my car and bring me a breakfast sandwich for me? He was making me one. I said, would you bring two? So he came up, and so I talked to her for like an hour, and I'm a pretty good judge of character. All right. So, and I could see that she had a bad situation at home. We had some really good conversations, because at one point she said, oh, well, I said, well, what about your dad? Well, I don't know. He's this and this. I said, well, do you know him? And she says, no. I said, well, how do you know? How do you know if you're hearing the truth about your dad? How about if you look for him and find out? I said, you're only hearing one side of the story. Anyway, we had a really good conversation about all kinds of things. And so I wanted to take her home and raise her, Dave. I did. But I can't. And I can't kidnap her. So I called a friend of mine who works with the girls in that situation. And I said, what do I do? Where do I take her? I cannot leave her here at this park. I'm not going to let something happen to her. And so she told me that there's the teen thing. It's over on Maryland Parkway, kind of by Maryland Parkway and Trop. I took her down there, and I gave her my phone number, and I said, please call me and let me know what happens to you, and this and that. And she was the sweetest girl in the world. And she just had a bad situation at home. And I say this because it broke my heart. There are a lot of kids who have really tough situations at home. And when you get to a certain point where you get, you're 18, now they kick you out the door. If you last that long. Now, what do you do? And when I see some of these people on the streets, I know that's probably how it started. And I understand how tough it would be to crawl out of that hole. So it killed me. There should be better facilities for that. I mean, clearly I can't take her home, or I might get arrested, because, I want to just help her and raise her. I thought, well, I could raise you for a couple more years till you're out of high school. She was such a nice girl. So, once again, don't think I'm heartless. I'm not. I tried to help her the best I could without breaking any laws. And, hopefully she's going to be okay. But I just thought, my gosh, there's a big gap in our services for people like her. What do you do when you're a teenager and it's tough at home, what, and you can't really leave yet because you don't really have the way to support yourself. But she wanted to stay in school. She liked school. I mean, it broke my heart. There's a real gap, I think, for that.
Well, I applaud your compassion and the fact that you're willing to help her, because if all of us were like that and trying to, you didn't give her a tent and say, why don't you live here? You help get her to a facility where she can get the help she needs. That's critical. Now, at the same time, I raised 2 boys, and there were some times that they disagreed with dad, and there were some times where they left and went to the park and probably told a story that I was terrible and that I was demanding that they work harder in school.
Right. And there are times I'm sure you just locked your kids out. Don't lie, Dave.
I'm grateful to still be very close with my 2 sons. One's in college, one's serving in the Marine Corps and in college.
That's wonderful.
So I'm grateful for his service, and I do pray that our whole country and he stays safe.
Absolutely. We've got some crazy times coming up. That's for sure. Listen, thanks for joining me. I so appreciate it. I'm going to get down there and we'll connect next week, and I'll try to get down there when you have some time. I'd love to see your facility.
Would love you to come by. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I loved our discourse.
Well, I want to help people. I want to help people. Listen, Vegas is my hometown. Born here, raised here. I love this town. I want it to stay good. And I don't want these people on the street. And it breaks my heart every time I see one of them. I don't look down on them with any contempt or anything. I'm brokenhearted, but I also know some people just flat out don't want to live by the rules of society. So, it's a tough balance. I understand always.
Give them a golden ticket.
Listen, I'm going to come down and get some from you, buddy. I mean, I've done things like buy gloves in the wintertime and hand them to homeless people at the parks and things like that, trying to be nice. But I think the golden ticket's probably better. Thank you, Dave, so much for your help. Thank you for what you do for our community. And I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for this opportunity. And I look forward to seeing you.
Great talking to him. Good information. We may not agree on everything. And it's not even a disagreement. It's just that, I want to help people. And there are a lot of people who just flat out enjoy not following the rules of society. That's really what it comes down to. They don't want to be told what to do, when to come in, where to go, and all this different. And I get it. And they're willing to sleep outside and be dirty in order to do that. I don't understand that. How could I possibly? So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was enlightening. And I don't have all the answers. Wish I did. Okay, guys, don't forget to follow me, Heidi Harris Show, all the socials, all that good stuff. Get signed up for my free email that I send out when I do some new stuff. You can find my videos, Heidi Harris Show, Facebook, X, Rumble, YouTube, all that good stuff. So follow me. Okay, guys, see ya.